Hello my dears, welcome back to another video. It's been such a long time since I've done a deep dive into a social topic, and so today that's basically what we're going to be doing. Today I want to explore the accusation that the trans movement is anti-gay. And when I personally say trans movement, I am specifically referring to trans activists and the kind of ideas and stuff that they are pushing forward. And I think it is important to specify that you're talking about trans activists, because whenever you say trans, people assume that you're talking about all trans people, when, I am fully aware that not every trans person is a trans activist and that not every trans activist is actually trans. So over the years, there's been a lot of emphasis on the conflict of interest between the rights that the trans activists are pushing for and women's rights. We've had a lot of discussions about women's sports, women's only spaces, women's prisons, etc. But there is also another conflict of interest that we don't talk about as much, and that's the conflict of interest between what the trans activists want and gay rights. Because of this acronym, it has caused them all to be lumped together, which has led many people to thinking that a win for trans activists is a win for all of them, when that's not necessarily the case for people who are lesbian, gay and bisexual, which is why you'll see some people saying that they want the LGB to split from the T. Now, there are many different reasons why people may want to transition, especially today, but one reason that we've always known about is homosexuality. There have always been young children who were gender non-conforming, and for some of them, mainly young boys, this would lead them to experiencing what we now know as gender dysphoria, especially if they had a lot of pushback from the adults around them for their gender non-conformity. And I think a lot of people can relate to this, even if you may not have experienced like full-fledged gender dysphoria, because when you're a kid you just like what you like, you don't think about things through the lens of gender norms. Like when I was a kid, I was a massive tomboy, and I remember one time I went shopping with my auntie and I really wanted her to get me this remote control car, and she said to me that she wasn't going to get me the toy because it was a boy's toy. And I remember in that moment, my little 7-year-old self, I don't even know if I was 7 to be honest, I was primary school age, but I don't actually remember how old I was. I remember thinking to myself, in that moment, I had made the executive decision that I wanted to be a boy. Now, did I actually want to be a boy? No, I just wanted to play with the remote control car. If my auntie had said that only dinosaurs play with that car, I would have decided then and there that I wanted to be a dinosaur, because that is just how children's minds work. And I do think that up until recently, when adults started losing their minds, we understood that that's how children's minds work. But this is why adult influence and adult reactions are so important, because it can contribute to a child maybe developing gender dysphoria and having the strong desire to be the opposite sex. Susie Green gave a TED Talk in 2017 discussing her journey to getting her child gender affirming care. Within the TED Talk, she discusses how her child displayed a lot of gender non-conforming traits when they were really young, and this caused a lot of conflict within her marriage because her husband didn't approve.
So, from Jack to Jackie. So, how did this 8-pound baby boy, and by the way, she hates this picture, she said it makes her look like a member of the Village People, turn into this 24-year-old young woman? She likes this picture, she says it makes her look hot. Well, Jack was my first child. I thought I knew what to expect, but really I started to notice that as soon as he got mobile and could express himself, he was gravitating towards things that you would see as stereotypically female. But I wasn't bothered. That didn't faze me at all. As far as I was concerned, children should be allowed to play with whatever they want to play with, even if it doesn't fit the norm. And at the childminders, when I went back to work, Jack's favourite outfits were the tutu and the Snow White costume. And again, that was fine. But not for Dad. So Jackie's dad struggled, and he blamed me. His thoughts were that because I allowed the Polly Pocket and the My Little Pony, that I was facilitating and encouraging. And I disagreed, and it caused tensions. What I had come to the conclusion with over the years up until she was about 2 was that I had a very sensitive, quite effeminate little boy who was probably gay. But Jack's dad did not approve of our child's effeminate behaviour. And it created such tensions that we ended up in couples counselling.
Now, as mentioned before, it's very, very common for children who decide to transition to have been displaying gender non-conforming traits from a really, really early age. Jazz Jennings is also another well-known example of this.
Jazz is transgender, a boy living as a girl.
I have a girl brain and boy body.
Hi.
When we first met Jazz in 2007, she was only 6 years old and one of the youngest documented cases of an early transition from male to female.
We'll say things like, God made you special, because there aren't very many little girls out there that have a penis.
At age 5, her parents, Jeanette and Greg, made an extraordinary decision. They allowed Jazz to openly identify in the opposite gender because they and their doctor were convinced this was not a phase, but a condition now called gender dysphoria. As difficult as it is for people to understand, you only had to walk into Jazz's bedroom, as I did.
Oh, how pretty.
To know this was not a passing fad. It was filled with girly things, dresses and dolls. But it was a picture she drew that made Jazz's world crystal clear.
Tell me about this picture. Why is the little girl crying?
Because she wants to wear the dress to school.
And Mommy won't let her.
Yeah.
But now, does Mommy let the little girl wear a dress?
Mm-hmm.
Is the little girl you?
For many years, we've always known that gender nonconformity in youth, while it's not a definite predictor, is often a very high predictor of whether or not a child is going to be same-sex attracted when they're older. This is one of the biggest reasons why homophobic parents typically are very uncomfortable with a child that is displaying gender nonconforming traits. There was a UK-based study that was done in 2017 on 4,500 children. The parents of these children had observed that their kids had shown gender nonconforming traits between the ages of 2.5 and 5 years old. The traits that they had noticed were their modes of play, as well as their playmate choices and their toy preferences. And what this study managed to find was that there was a very high predictor between gender nonconformity in early years and homosexuality later in life. The researchers caught up with these children later in life when they were 15-year-old teenagers, and what they found was that lesbian girls were 12 to 19 times more likely to have displayed gender nonconformity as young children compared to heterosexual girls, and gay boys were 20 to 26 times more likely to have displayed gender nonconformity as young children compared to heterosexual boys. And while both straight and same-sex attracted youths can both experience gender dysphoria, it was much more likely for gender dysphoria to persist in same-sex attracted adolescents. This is also the reason why, before we started moving towards the gender-affirming care model, medical professionals used to practice what was called watchful waiting. Because what a lot of medical professionals had noticed is that if these young children who were showing gender nonconformity in their earlier years, even if they did experience gender dysphoria, if they were left alone and left to go through their natural puberty, most of them would pass through this stage or grow out of this stage and grow up to be healthy same-sex attracted adults. And this information is exactly why the UK's National Health Service declared that gender questioning youth are going through what they called a transient phase, and they advised against medical interventions at this stage. I've seen some people describe puberty as being like the missing puzzle piece that they needed to understand their sexuality, because once they go through puberty and understand that they're same-sex attracted and they come to terms with that, they tended to find that their gender dysphoria tended to pass as well. And so this is one of the reasons why a lot of people had a big problem with puberty blockers, because by giving them puberty blockers and stopping their puberty, you prevent them from going through that process and developing that clarity. And some have even noted that the sexuality aspect of this could also be one of the reasons why some parents are motivated to transition their gender non-conforming child.
But we know, and this is very important for people to understand, that the same young people who are same-sex attracted are disproportionately overwhelmingly represented among kids who present as trans. Right? It's boys who are effeminate. It's girls who are tomboys. It's kids who are gender non-conforming. And we know that gender non-conformity in youth, every study says this, is a very reliable predictor of homosexuality in later life. It doesn't mean that a camp, effeminate boy will turn out to be gay. That's not what I'm saying. 9 times out of 10 they will, right? So that's what the studies tell us. So you're taking these kids along who don't fit into this old-fashioned heterosexual men should behave like this, women should behave like this paradigm, and fixing them and correcting them according to 1950s sex stereotypes. And they're doing that in the name of progress. We know that the whistleblowers from the Tavistock, from all of these gender clinics, they say again and again, one of the biggest explanatory aspects of this is parents who don't want to have a gay kid. They're much happier having a kid who's heterosexual and trans because they're uncomfortable. They don't like the idea. They're ashamed of it.
Same-sex attracted youths being much more likely to seek gender transition is something that was also noted at the Tavistock Clinic. Journalist Hannah Barnes wrote about this in her review in the book Time to Think. Here she discusses what she was able to find out about the patients at the Tavistock Gender Clinic.
How many of these young people are just gay?
Well, I can't answer that definitively. What I can say is that from the very limited data that exist, many of the young people referred to gender clinics, well, certainly to GIDS, are same-sex attracted or are bisexual. So what we know is that actually, so the 70 young people in the Netherlands who were part of these two Dutch studies, well, one Dutch study really, but two tranches, which forms the basis of all gender-affirming medical care for children. All of the girls in that study, all of the biological females, were same-sex attracted or bisexual. None were opposite sex attracted, and one of the boys was, which is quite striking. The data that we have from GIDS is that of those referred in 2012, so, more than a decade ago now, of the older young people that were referred, so 12 and up, for whom they had data, which was about 100, just under 100. So again, not great. Around 90% of the girls were same-sex attracted or bisexual, and about 80% of the boys, roughly. And the only more recent data we have from GIDS, but we haven't seen any sort of breakdown, it's just on their website, it's from about 2015, so we don't know what the numbers are. But this puts it at about 70% combined for the girls, either same-sex attracted or bisexual, and about 60% for the boys. So still very, very high. And this was a concern that many, many, many clinicians had. And I want to be clear that it is not it's not solely coming from those clinicians who are themselves gay or lesbian or bisexual. It was so widely seen. And I think some of those clinicians say that the charge was put to them, well, you're too close to it because you're gay, and therefore you can't be subjective about this. Now GIDS would deny that happened, but actually, when I put that to them, when I spoke to them for the book, one clinician, Anna Hutchinson, she said, look at the data. That it's not, we weren't seeing something that wasn't there. And okay, the data aren't great. We only have a couple of years, but we saw this on a daily basis. Young people, mainly girls, but the boys as well, sitting in front of us, talking about how they had a relationship with someone of the same sex, been experienced homophobic bullying, and then came to identify as trans.
And so all of this is one of the reasons why some lesbian, gay and bisexual people have a big issue with the trans movement, because they see themselves in these children, because they were once these children themselves. And so many of them have even gone as far as to dub this the new age gay conversion therapy, because rather than allowing these children to explore their gender nonconformity and to go through their puberty and develop as healthy same-sex attracted adults, instead we are medically intervening and altering their bodies to try and make them appear like the opposite sex so that they can be perceived as straight. The idea of gender has complicated a lot of things, but one of the things that it has complicated is sexuality. The main reason for this, to be honest, is because we just simply cannot agree on definitions anymore. For most people, sex and gender mean the same thing. They are interchangeable synonyms, and most of the time when people are using both of these terms, they are strictly referring to someone's biological sex. But for some people, gender and sex are two separate things, with sex being more about your biological makeup and gender being more of a social construct that can be altered and changed. Now, understandably, this has raised a lot of problems when it comes to how we define sexuality, because of course, if we're going by different definitions and understanding of what gender means, then it's going to also have an effect on how we understand sexuality, with some people believing that sexuality is purely biological and what you're attracted to is either the same sex or the opposite sex or both. Because some people want to alter the definition of what it means to be gay, lesbian, bisexual or straight, they are also including gender identity within their definitions. And so this kind of makes things a bit more complicated. In the same way that there are heterosexual people who are called bigoted for not wanting to date a trans person because they may not have the type of anatomy that they prefer, there are also lesbian and gay people who are also accused of being bigoted for not wanting to date people who may not have the things that they prefer. One of the most public and blatant examples of this was when the CEO of the lesbian dating app Her made a public announcement to all the lesbians who were using the app that you are not welcome if you do not want to date a trans woman, so a biological male who identifies as a woman who very likely still has their penis. If you're not willing to date someone who falls into that description, then you are not welcome on the lesbian dating app.
Happy Lesbian Visibility Week. Happy Lesbian Visibility Day. From me, I'm Robin. I'm the CEO at Her, and from all of the Her team, to all our lesbians in our thriving community, we see you, we love you. And a big thing we're wanting to talk about this year for Lesbian Visibility Day is the incredible breadth and representation of this lesbian community. There are some, frankly, just like hideous, overbearing, aggressive, offensive voices right now on the internet, the TERFs, and we're done with them. Like, we are here to make it clear that lesbians exist of all different kinds and types. There is no one way to be a lesbian. And so anyone who is trying to suggest or other you in your lesbian identity can get the f out, especially if it's on Her. We are a platform for all lesbians, trans lesbian, non-binary lesbians. You are all part of our lesbian community. And there's no space for TERFs on Her. So with that, happy Lesbian Visibility Day.
A lesbian speed dating event was also shut down for only wanting to have biological females at the event. There are also females on Grindr, which is a dating app for gay men. Now, while some have welcomed some of these changes as being good and being progressive, there are a lot of people who take a lot of issue with all of this. And there are many who feel that all of this is just basically erasing what it actually means to be gay or lesbian. And this is why the trans movement has had accusations of being anti-gay.
Is the trans movement anti-gay?
Well, it depends what you mean by anti-gay, obviously. I don't think it's a conscious hatred on the part of trans activists. However, if you look at the implications of gender ideology, then it pretty quickly becomes problematic for lesbians and gay men, and particularly for younger ones.
How so?
Because in order to redefine womanhood and manhood in terms of inner feelings rather than outward biological facts, and in order to kind of make that stick, you have to change all these other things. As you know, you have to change the meaning of the words mother and father and grandmother and aunt and uncle, and you also have to change the meanings of the words of lesbian and gay man, because the old traditional understandings of those terms were based on an idea of sexual orientation as a relationship between biological sexes, like a attraction relationship between biological sexes, so you're same-sex attracted or you're opposite-sex attracted. But if we go with this fiction that people have switched, you know, that women can, well, that males can be women or that they can switch category, then, so say if you transitioned tomorrow and told me, now I'm a woman now, and I would say, well, who are you attracted to? And you'd say, oh, women. Well, that makes you a lesbian. So now you're not just a woman, you're a lesbian because you're a woman, inverted commas, attracted to women. So you must be a lesbian. And equally you get females who think that they're gay men, basically, because they're still attracted to men. But they think they've switched out of their heterosexual category into a homosexual category. And I know that sounds mad.
Yeah.
But it is, unfortunately, the position of major LGBTQ organizations. So they've got, trans lesbians, there's men in lesbian groups calling themselves lesbians with the blessing of the LGBTQ overlords. And that just messes everything up. I mean, it particularly messes things up for lesbians because the whole point, we were trying to get away from men in our sexual orientations, like not have basically men coming on to us telling us they're lesbians too. I know it sounds crazy, but, lesbians have penises now. Lesbians, so it's a role play that's got out of hand. But and it would mean nothing if it was just a bunch of silly kids messing around on Tumblr or something. But the problem is that well-funded LGBTQ organizations are really on board with this. And then they say things like, so in the UK, the head of Stonewall being our massively well-funded, started off gay rights organization and lobbying group, and now it's LGBTQ. The head of Stonewall basically talks about people like me, lesbians, not wanting to sleep with trans women because they're men, as some kind of moral flaw, that we should really open our minds. And she made an equivalence with a bit like a white person not wanting to sleep with a black person. So she called it a bit like sexual racism.
It's like you can't be like a straight up lesbian anymore.
Why not?
Because they call you transphobic. If you like, I'm a lesbian that like I only want like vagina. Sorry. Oh, you're transphobic because some trans women have penises and some trans women are women and some trans women are lesbians and you need to like. It's like no, it's not how it works. But
so you're saying being attracted to the same sex, in your case, the female sex, is considered exclusionary by trans activists?
100%. When I go on dates and they find out like who I am, whatever, they'll be like, a lot of them will be like, oh, you must have girls up in your DMs flirting with you. I'm like, actually, it's a lot of like gay people that are like, I'm outcasted at my school because I'm like homosexual and I'm not non-binary and not queer and I'm not, trans identifying and I'm not open to everything. It's like, because you're just gay, like.
So you're not rainbow enough anymore.
You're not rainbow enough. You can't just be like a basic gay guy or a basic lesbian anymore.
But trans activists would push back on that and say, no, this is not anti-gay at all, because what these people have is a genital preference, and genital preferences are inherently transphobic. All of this has led to some LGBT people creating their own alternative dating apps with AI facial recognition software so that it can recognize people of the opposite sex and filter them out. Jenny Watson is a lesbian rights campaigner who was behind the creation of one of these apps. She has explained that as a result, she has received death threats, people posting dog poop and other questionable substances through her letterbox, and she's also received a ton of unsolicited videos and pictures of male genitalia, because I guess nothing says you're a woman more than sending unsolicited dick pics. I guess to some trans activists, this is a very reasonable response to a lesbian who wants an exclusively female lesbian space. There have also been articles accusing Jenny Watson of being trans exclusionary, but she has said within interviews that she's done that she's not trans exclusionary, she's male exclusionary. So she's perfectly happy for, say, a female who identifies as a man to be on the platform, and she's also happy for females who identify as non-binary or anything like that to be on the platform. She just doesn't want anyone who's biologically male on the platform. And I do think that's quite interesting, actually, because I do wonder how that would work with the AI facial recognition software, because there are a lot of women who transition and become trans men who are very, very, very convincing, like super, super passable. Like Buck Angel is a really, really good example of someone who is so passing, like I would not know that Buck Angel is female. So I do wonder how that's going to work, because testosterone is one hell of a drug. Like, it's crazy. Since the whole trans debate or trans discussion, whatever you want to call it, has taken place, it has really opened up a big conversation about spaces and about segregation. And I think it's changed a lot of people's perspective on segregation. I think prior to all of this happening, people, whenever they thought of segregation, they always thought of like really negative historical examples, like racial segregation or gender segregation, in terms of like women not being allowed to vote or be allowed to be involved in politics and education and all that kind of stuff. But I think now it's kind of changed a lot of people's minds about segregating people from each other. We're now starting to see that there can be positives to segregation, and it doesn't always have to be motivated by malice. Like sometimes women just want to be in a space that's only female, and sometimes men also want to be in a space that's only male. And I think that has also been quite interesting, because I've seen some women, some feminists, openly admit that they were wrong to completely obliterate male-only spaces, because I think now, because of all of this, people are now starting to see the value of keeping things segregated sometimes. Like, not everything has to be unisex, not everything has to have everybody involved in it. And so I do think this could potentially lead to a much larger conversation, because I think when it comes to the topic of like men's only spaces, for example, some of them did need to be invaded, to be honest, because, you know, politics, education, these kind of things, women needed to be in the room. We make up 50% of the population, so I do think we should have some say in what goes on within society. But gentlemen's clubs and all of these like male only like socializing type of things, like there was no need for women to enter those whatsoever. And I wouldn't be surprised as well if getting rid of a lot of these things probably has contributed to the male loneliness epidemic that a lot of people talk about. I am curious to see if we start to see more men's only spaces and women's only spaces, because there's still a lot of women's only spaces, but I'm interested to see if we see more men's only spaces come back. Another issue I've also seen people raise is that a lot of lesbian, gay and bisexual people feel as though they've been excluded from their own rights organizations. This is what has led to LGBT people deciding to create their own movements, such as here in the UK, the LGB Alliance.
I've been shocked at the rise of openly homophobic remarks that I've seen online, some very vicious homophobic things, often from people who propose gender ideology as a thing. So what's going on here, and why are Stonewall failing to address it?
Up until 2015, Stonewall was an LGB organisation. It promoted the rights of LGBT people. It originally was against same-sex marriage, but then came on board with it and played a good role in achieving same-sex marriage. And then it found itself, perhaps in 2015, without much left to do, and decided it had to embrace a new mission. One new mission it could have embraced, and I think perhaps it should have embraced, was to fight homophobia around the world, because there are still 69 countries around the world that criminalise homosexuality. That's something that we really ought to be fighting against. And they had another choice, which was perhaps more lucrative, I don't know, and that was to promote gender identity. And I think it's really important to say it's about gender identity, because every time we talk about gender identity, it gets into the papers as new trans rights row. It's not about trans rights.
So, I mean, because you've been described as anti-trans, an anti-trans hate group by some commentators. I mean, how do you respond to that? Well, I mean, do you have a problem with trans people and their rights?
Well, of course not. I mean, lots of trans people support us. And we were called a hate group from within 12 hours of us having our first meeting, on the basis that we were called LGB Alliance, which was just a throwaway. I remember when I said to Kate, should we, I don't know, it's about sexual orientation, should we call ourselves LGB Alliance? And she said, well, we could do that. We can always change it later. It was absolutely not a decision to leave out anything. It was just, we felt there was a new need to fight this homophobia that you were just talking about.
Other gay organisations who are trying to push back is the American group Gays Against Groomers. Part of the issue with the whole LGBT plus acronym is that because it lumps everyone together, it kind of assumes that, like I said, every win for the trans activists is inherently a win for all, like, for gay, lesbian and bisexual people, when that's not necessarily the case, because as we've seen with the examples I discussed earlier in this video, some of the things that they want actually clash with the interests of lesbian, gay and bisexual people. But one thing that has happened because of everyone being lumped under this acronym is that any negative publicity that one part of the acronym receives has a negative impact on everybody. So if trans people are receiving a lot of really negative representation in the media, it ends up having a negative impact on lesbian, gay, and bisexual people as well. Now, this isn't just trans people either. I've also seen a lot of lesbian, gay, and bisexual people say that the non-binaries and the queer groups, like those people who identify as that, are also causing a lot of issues for them and giving them a bad name, especially with how they act and stuff at pride parades, etc. Because yeah, the problem is when you lump different groups of people together, if they are seen as being one community, then any negative press that happens is going to affect everyone within that community, because we're now starting to see people having conversations about whether or not gay marriage should have ever been legalized, and if the slippery slope theories that people had at the time are now coming into fruition.
I'm Catholic. I was raised in an Italian Catholic household. My whole family goes back to Italy, South Philadelphia, basically Italian ghetto. I grew up in a family in which, and including to recent relatives, gay is psychological disorder. This is a bunch of weirdo stuff. Yeah. And this is all just sin and terrible. Yeah. That is how I was raised. And so I adopted that as a belief until I got out of college, started working in New York City, met and worked with and befriended and came to love and respect gay people. And I honestly grew up with a certain amount of just genuine disgust. Yeah. As a heterosexual man, like this makes me uncomfortable. If I find out, if I went to college and somebody reveals they're gay and it's like, are they coming on to me? Am I, all that stuff. All that stuff is there. And I've gone through this journey of coming to love and appreciate and understand that my cousin who's gay didn't choose to be gay. He's gay. He deserves to have a happy life. And now I'm starting to feel myself pulled into a wary posture. Yeah. Because of the insanity you're talking about. Yes. And starting to say, was gay marriage a mistake?
And this is the reason why it's become even more important for a lot of LGBT people to create their own separate organizations to advocate for themselves, to try and prevent some of these negative attitudes that are starting to resurface. So there we have it, my friends. Those are just some of the reasons that I've learnt are why there's a bit of conflict of interest between the LGBT and trans activists. I would like to know what you all think about any of this. Have you noticed any of this stuff yourself? Or maybe there are some things that I didn't address within the video that you have noticed. I would be really, really interested to know what your thoughts are on all of this down below. So do let me know. If you enjoyed this video, you may as well like and subscribe. As always, thank you so much for giving me your time today, and I will see you in my next video.